Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Here we are getting you your weekly dose of major international news with a perspective. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. Opposition slams the government over foreign policy handling. World Panorama takes a look at the challenges ahead for India. Indian prisoner Sarabjit Singh's death in Pakistan sparks angry reactions across India. India calls it abject failure on the part of Pakistan. And Pakistan in the grip of violence ahead of the crucial May 11 election. Government ups security and promises free and fair polling. Straight to the story in focus this week. With the death of Sarabjit Singh in Pakistan's custody, Manmohan Singh's government is now virtually without any big-ticket foreign policy success in the immediate neighborhood. Now, this particular incident is the latest in a series of blows to Indo-Pak ties, undermining the structure of a massive investment in the Pakistan relationship that Dr. Manmohan Singh has made, from continuing terror attacks to beheading of an Indian soldier on the LOC and now Sarabjit's death. The big initiative pushing people-to-people ties with Islamabad will have to be rebuilt. In eastern Ladakh, the sudden move by the Chinese to post troops in the strategically sensitive Depsang Bulge has landed New Delhi in a quandary. The Chinese are clearly testing India, and these incursions could just as easily happen in other sectors as well if the Chinese feel confident that they can get away with them. Now, either way, the UPA government's China policy is in shambles. Bangladesh was supposed to be a big foreign policy initiative of Manmohan Singh government, but he failed to get the TISA agreement from the clutches of West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. Over in Sri Lanka, the government sacrificed a healthy relationship at the altar of partisan Tamil Nadu politics by voting against Colombo at the UNHRC in Geneva. The Emerald Isles are once again one of India's most important partners, along with the Maldives, as New Delhi strikes out in the Indian Ocean region. While India still remains important, there is a distinct crease of discomfort with Sri Lanka. With so many challenges ahead as far as India's foreign policy is concerned, UPA has its task cut out. The opposition is using these very cases against the government, calling the policy itself in a state of coma. Can a course correction happen, at least in some of these cases? What should be the External Affairs Minister's tone and tenor when issues of such magnitude call for his attention? Do we need to altogether have a relook at our foreign policy to make it federal in nature? Would that help? To discuss this and more this week on the show, I'm pleased to welcome former Ambassador Veena Sikri. Thank you, Ambassador Sikri, so much for joining me on the show. Let me start by asking you with the, we'll talk about Sarabjit in just a bit, but about the Chinese incursion, the talks which are scheduled on the 9th of May seem to be heading nowhere. We heard a statement from Salman Khurshid saying that there's little or maybe even no progress as far as talks are concerned. How do you see this?
I think that you are right in your assessment that this is certainly an attempt by the Chinese to test out India's resolve to maintain its boundaries. And I think that we've seen the national opinion in India building up to a tremendous extent. And I think this is a new development, a fairly new development, both in the Sarabjit Singh case and in the Chinese incursions in eastern Ladakh, that the public opinion is now at a fever pitch. And I think this is something that has to give pause to the government, that whatever strategy they may have adopted earlier to deal with it, okay, keep it quiet, keep it calm, do behind the scenes diplomacy, it just is not working. And I think this has given a really reason for thinking, for rethinking the formulation and implementation of foreign policy.
Right.
I think if you look at it, what is foreign policy? Foreign policy is the protection of your national sovereignty, that's borders, maritime, land, air border, cyberspace, and the achievement of your national objectives through interaction with other countries. Yeah. Now, what are your national objectives? Peace, stability, prosperity, growth with equity. That's what the people want. Now, for that, you need a peaceful neighborhood. You cannot achieve any of these objectives within the country until you have a peaceful neighborhood where also there is prosperity, growth, stability, and equity.
There needs to be a perfect balance between.
Exactly. So it is in India's own interest to work a foreign policy that brings peace and stability in the neighborhood. It may be through firm action, because sometimes your neighbors are testing you.
Yeah.
And your neighbors are also trying to test you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you are trying to say that, okay, fine, you know, India is weak, so let's try and test India through neighbors. The Pakistan-China relationship is a classic example, where China uses Pakistan to test India out. China's interest in Bangladesh, China's interest in Myanmar, China's interest in Sri Lanka. All the trouble spots you've mentioned are places where China is itself trying to ingratiate itself with the people, extensive military assistance, defense assistance, which brings the defense forces on their side and creates a tremendous difficulty with India. Yeah. Now, I must tell you that in all these countries, I've served in Bangladesh, I've visited all the other countries, the people are your best ally, because for the people of South Asia, whether it is Pakistan or Bangladesh or Nepal, for example, we didn't mention Nepal so far, Sri Lanka, they find a very important factor of bonding, of friendship, of education, of interest in medical treatment, interest in pilgrimage. These are very natural interests in this civilizational relationship that all of South Asia has. So in today's day and age, when there's a global phenomenon, instant communication, social media, Twitter, Facebook, people want to be involved, and they should be involved. Our message, we have to deal with the government of the day, that is a given. We do that, we continue to do that. But the message that India has to give must reach straight to the people, and then you will find a response.
Right. So people play a very crucial role. That, of course, is a very, very crucial point. But coming back to China, you know, where is India really going wrong? Why aren't things really working out? We see that China is very, very aggressive as far as, you know, when it wants to put its stand forward, it is very assertive, very aggressive. Why can't India, if it believes what it's right?
I think, again, we have to draw a line. Where do you need soft action, soft power, soft diplomacy? Where do you need firmness? I think the China's actions in East Ladakh certainly called for a firm answer. Definitely. I think, you know, in terms of what you can do in the beginning of a problem, when the very first tent or bunker or whatever it is was planning to be put up, you could just immediately take action because it wasn't there before. And that situation, that strength you had of the immediacy of a firm response has withered away with the passage of days, 15, 18, 20 days, to almost nothing. Now you can't do it because you need much more effort. You have to mobilize your own forces. And I think that was one aspect. Second aspect is the confusion in management control of that section. You have the ITPB, which is a report to the Home Ministry, and is not under the operational command of the army. As against this, in the western sector with Pakistan, you have the BSF at the border under the operational control of the army at that point. Although once against the BSF is under the Home Ministry for all other administrative purposes. So this confusion in the eastern sector. Secondly, I think there's been a great deal of discussion on this, that how much operational freedom do you give to the people on the spot? You know, of course, reporting back to headquarters is a very essential part of it, but some degree of operational
quick action
response. So these are operational aspects which are very important. And then, of course, you have the question that when something like this happens, how do you take it up with the government concerned?
Let me also ask you very quickly, you know, we are talking about India's foreign policy, and we are talking about the stand that India has taken, especially in the recent past. When we talk about states, most of these states share a boundary with other countries. So it becomes that much more essential to take into account what these states feel, be it the you know, issue with Bangladesh or the Teesta Water Agreement, or be it Nepal or even Sri Lankan Tamil issue. What do you think needs to be done as far as that is concerned? The government is always in this.
I must say this is a very important aspect, and the strength of India's foreign policy, certainly in the days of Jawaharlal Nehru, and I think even beyond that, the strength of India's foreign policy was that it was based on national consensus. And I know, I've served in so many missions abroad, this was the envy of other countries, that governments could change in India, but national foreign policy did not change. This was our strength, and this evolution of national consensus, this has been missing. And to evolve the national consensus, you need the opposition parties in the center, but you also need the state governments, because the state governments are very important stakeholders. In Bangladesh, water, illegal immigration, this is all where the bread and butter of West Bengal is involved in this. So the consultation with the state governments, their involvement has to be at the formulation stage, not at the implementation stage. So whether it is the TMC in West Bengal, the DMK or the AIADMK in Sri Lanka, in Tamil Nadu, Nadu, the Akali Dal in Punjab, all these have their own domestic concerns and interests, but if they are consulted, and that is an important aspect to be, drilled into every political party of India, that national consensus, we must present a united front. This is India's strength, and this has been India's glory in the past. We must go back to that. All party meetings in Parliament, consultation with the state governments, pointing out, I'll give you an example with Bangladesh, the Ganga Waters Treaty, a very difficult treaty, but well negotiated. Jyoti Basu, the then Chief Minister of Bengal, was in the forefront of negotiations. He was the one who was allowed to take it on, and okay, now you negotiate. So
allowed to take it on is a key point.
That's it, because obviously the state foreign policy is a central government responsibility. There is no way that a state government has any responsibility for foreign policy. But in the evolution of that foreign policy, depending on the role you give to the state government, then they become stakeholders in the success of that policy.
True.
So that unity of purpose is important, even if there are political differences. The awareness and the consciousness, this has to be India's strength.
Right. Hold on to that thought. I'm going to come back to you. We'll continue talking about, we'll delve deeper into Indo-Pak ties now. We do need to take a look at this report first. Indian death row prisoner Sarabjit Singh died of cardiac arrest at a Lahore hospital in the wee hours on Thursday after being comatose for nearly a week following a brutal assault by other inmates of a high security jail. Sarabjit's death has angered the nation, and even political parties have demanded for strict action against Pakistan. Have a look at this detailed report and then we'll come back. When all prayers failed, Sarabjit Singh was destined to breathe his last across the border, in Pakistan, where he was being held prisoner. Within hours, the news was telecast on all major networks across India and Pakistan. A day later, his body arrived back home, wrapped in the tricolour. Back in India, asserting that the death of Sarabjit Singh has hurt people-to-people ties between India and Pakistan, External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid hoped that the tragedy will help understand the cost of hostility between the two countries.
Governments can sometimes disagree, governments can sometimes sit together and talk, but the sustainable and long-lasting relationship has to be between people. And I think that's today been very, very sadly and in a very distressing manner, that is a relationship that has been hurt by this terrible tragedy.
I hope not, because it is very important that relations between Pakistan and India remain on track. It is important that both countries should remain engaged in an uninterrupted and uninterruptible dialogue process. That is for the larger interest of the people of the two countries. For its part, Pakistan remains fully committed to continuing our dialogue process in every respect.
Sarabjit, 49, sustained severe injuries, including a fractured skull, when at least 6 prisoners attacked him in a barrack at Kot Lakhpat jail last week. He was hit on the head with bricks and had been comatose in hospital since then. All right, a lot of debate is going on in various media networks about what exactly happened, about India-Pak ties, and will they be affected? My question to you, Ambassador Sikri, is very straightforward. Do you think India-Pakistan relationship is going to be jeopardized by Sarabjit's death and now the case of Sanaullah beaten up back home in the jail?
I think inevitably they will be affected for the simple reason and the strong reason that public opinion in India has turned hugely against Pakistan. You could have had a situation, say, 2 years ago, or certainly before 26/11, where a lot of people in India were saying, come on, let's have a settlement, let's settle it, let's finish it off, and let's not carry this on very much more. But incidents like 26/11, incidents like the beheading of the soldiers, incidents like the death of Sarabjit Singh, have turned public opinion against Pakistan in such a huge way that it's really going to be difficult. I agree that dialogue should go on, but when things like this happen, the context and the content of the dialogue has to change sharply to match the incidents that are happening. You cannot continue a dialogue as though nothing has happened, as though you're living in an ivory tower and something is going on in a way that what's happening outside is irrelevant. It is not, because the people, not only is their public opinion changing, but they want a say. And they will not accept a consensus that has not reflected what they are feeling. And every country wants peace and prosperity. And they want to have good neighborly relations. I think there's nobody in India who doesn't want it. But again and again and again, if you're going to have these negative feedback that the army or the jihadi elements or the army elements or the non-state actors, whatever, come in and destroy the atmosphere, it does affect the relationship, and you've moved 3 or 4 steps backwards. It's going to take you a lot more effort to get up to the point where you were. And it makes it very difficult for the government to then carry on the policy that it has been doing. And as you said rightly, the effort invested in good relations then becomes a complete waste. So I think the lesson of that is that by all means invest the effort in good relations. That is a good thing to do, but you have to keep a public opinion on board in your own country and in that country, and you have to have the levers of diplomacy ready at your hand. That whether it is Pakistan, whether it is China, if they do something that is not in keeping with your national interest, you should have those levers of diplomacy ready to tell them that, look, we're not going to take this lying down. Firm action. Soft diplomacy, soft power, by all means to convince the people and get friendship. But firm action is somebody is knowingly acting in your
like you said,
negative
it is very essential to gauge what is needed at what time, and a perfect balance also between the two will help.
And timing is of the essence, and there is absolutely no controversy or no contradiction between being firm on one point, which is like, say, coming into Depsang in East Ladakh, or the death of Sarabjit Singh. You can be very, very firm, and you can easily be very giving on trade, on other matters, which would be a policy that should convince Pakistan that we don't want bad relations with them. But we will be very, very firm on our points of national interest. We will be easy on trade and things like that, which also are of mutual benefit. But don't take it for granted that this means a completely soft line everywhere and gives you a free handle that for your own national elections, you can do what you like to play the India
Ambassador Sikri, thanks so much. I'll have to wrap up this discussion right here. It was a pleasure having you on the show. Hope to see you very soon next time. With that, we're taking a very quick break. Lots more up ahead. We'll get you the latest from Syria. US admits that arming rebels could be an option. Detailed report coming up in just a bit. Thanks for staying with us. Growing evidence that the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad may have used chemical weapons against its own people has led to a crescendo of demands for the US to intervene in the Syrian civil war. The possibility of chemical weapons being used in Syria's conflict is causing concern across the border in Turkey as well. While US President Barack Obama describes their use as crossing a line, and Damascus claims rebels are deploying them and then blaming the government, people living in nearby Turkey are worried about the condition of wounded Syrians. Here's a detailed report.
Pressure on Obama to act on Syria has grown since the disclosure of US intelligence that Assad's forces likely used chemical weapons on a small scale, particularly sarin gas.
We'll continue to evaluate that every step of the way. But as I mentioned at my press conference back in D.C., we want to make sure that we look before we leap, and that what we're doing is actually helpful to the situation as opposed to making it more deadly or more complex.
The Syrian government has also mounted a string of attacks reaching from the capital, Damascus, and the central city of Homs out to Mediterranean coast, homeland of Alawite minority sect to which Assad himself belongs. The rebels claim they have proof, something like the US is looking for. Syrian rebels have captured and secured what they believe to be an unexploded chemical weapon.
We have a lot of evidence, we have blood samples, we have the people who are affected by this, and we have samples from the ground. And the new things that 4 days ago in Sarakib, we have some bombs that not explode. We have this chemical weapon not explode, and we put it in container, and we can provide it for any country or any government.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad made a rare public appearance on Wednesday visiting a Damascus power station. Fears over chemical weapons have increased after several Syrians with breathing difficulties were brought to a Turkish hospital in Hatay province along the Syrian border. Washington has long said it views the use of chemical weapons in Syria as a red line, but vary the false intelligence that it was used to justify the 2003 war in Iraq. It had said it wants proof before taking action.
The challenges for the Election Commission of Pakistan to hold a free and peaceful election on 11th of May keep growing. These elections are being seen as a key moment in Pakistan's attempts to shake off a legacy of decades of military rule, as they represent the first time a democratically elected government has completed a term in office. First, a chair brawl at an election rally in Lahore. And then protests in Chitral in support of former President Pervez Musharraf after a court imposed a lifetime ban on him contesting elections. Pakistan can be an unpredictable place, but in a checkered history that has kept lurching from crisis to coups, one event has kept coming back with reassuring certainty: elections. Pakistan's army chief announced support for the upcoming general election, which will mark the first time a democratically elected civilian government that has completed a term in office.
मैं आपको यकीन दिलाता हूं कि पाक अफवाज अपनी तमाम तर बसात और सलाहियत के मुताबिक और आईनी हदूद में रहते हुए इंतखाबात के साफ व शफाफ और पुरअमन इनेकाद में भरपूर मुआवनत करेगी। मैं आपको ये भी यकीन दिलाता हूँ कि पाकिस्तान फ़ौज की ये मुआवनत जमहूरी निज़ाम की मजबूती और उसे देरपा बुनियादों पर उस्तवार करने के लिए होगी।
General Ashfaq Parvez Kayani told the audience at a Martyrs' Day ceremony in the garrison city of Rawalpindi that the army would help strengthen democracy and rule of law in Pakistan.
मुल्क में इंतखाबात के इनेकाद इंशाअल्लाह 11 मई को होगा। हमें इसमें कोई शक नहीं होना चाहिए। ये एक सुनहरी मौका है जिससे जमहूरियत की आला रवायात के एक नए दौर का आगाज़ हो सकता है। मेरी नज़र में जमहूरियत और आमरीत की आंख मचोली का आसाफ शिकन खेल सिर्फ सज़ा और जज़ा के निज़ाम ही से नहीं, बल्कि अवाम की आगाही और भरपूर शमूलियत ही से ख़त्म हो सकता है।
The one factor that casts a long shadow is the spectre of unmanageable violence. Against the backdrop of recent sectarian attacks, attacks on security personnel, bombings in urban areas, the ongoing TTP insurgency in the western areas, its linkages with militant outfits and threats to disrupt elections, and the cross-border attacks from Afghan territory all combine to make the threat of violence very real.
Let me say a few words, though, about the violence in Pakistan. The United States condemns the recent violence that has targeted politicians and their supporters during the electoral campaign in Pakistan. We likewise condemn recent statements by militant groups indicating their intent to disrupt Pakistan's democratic process. We support the right of the Pakistani people to participate fully in the election of their representatives and their ability to fulfill their aspirations for a peaceful, prosperous, and democratic nation.
The elections are seen as a key moment in Pakistan's attempts to shake off a legacy of decades of military rule, as they represent the first time a democratically elected civilian government that has completed a term in office. Pakistan is once again at a crossroads. And with that, time now to take a look at some of the other international news in a quick wrap. Here's Globe Watch.
Italy will need to take extra budgetary measures to ensure it gets out of the European Union's excessive deficit procedure this year, the head of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said on Thursday. The comments underlined the stiff challenges facing new Prime Minister Enrico Letta, who is balancing calls for Europe to put a new emphasis on growth and investment with pledges to meet Italy's current budget targets. North Korea's state media released new still photos of its leader Kim Jong-un on May 2nd, meeting workers to mark May Day. The photos, run by the North state-run television KRT, showed Kim visiting the Ministry of People Security and of him watching a soccer match with his wife. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to continue to hit those responsible for rocket fire. His comments came as mourners marched in a funeral procession in the Gaza Strip for a Palestinian killed in the first Israeli-targeted attack against militants since a ceasefire ended an 8-day war in November. Islamist militants in Gaza have fired intermittently at Israel in the past weeks despite an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire reached after the November conflict. Tensions remain high in Myanmar after a fresh outbreak of sectarian violence left one person dead in Oken and nearby villages. Sectarian clashes between Buddhists and Muslims, who make up about 5% of the Myanmar's population, have erupted on several occasions since a quasi-civilian government took over in March 2011 after 5 decades of brutal military dictatorship.
Some sports news stories from through the week now in Sports Action. Birmingham City Football Club owner Carson Young continues to face trial after a Hong Kong court ruled against his application to drop his money laundering case that involves over $92.74 million. Young had pleaded not guilty to 5 charges which prosecutors said occurred between 2001 and 7 of dealing with property known or believed to represent proceeds of an indictable offence. His defense team had sought to dismiss the case, saying some related documents were no longer available. World number 2 Rory McIlroy, back at the scene of his first PGA Tour win, fired a 5-under-67 at Quail Hollow for a 7-way share for the first round lead in the Wells Fargo Championship in Charlotte, North Carolina. McIlroy, still looking for his first tournament victory this year, struggled early in the season to find his top form after switching his golf ball and clubs. The Asian Football Confederation handed the reins of power to Sheikh Salman bin Ibrahim Al Khalifa, ignoring concerns about alleged human rights breaches and electing the Bahraini as its new president and member of FIFA's all-powerful executive committee. Rio de Janeiro Mayor Eduardo Paes said the host city for 2016 Summer Olympics is on time after meeting with members of the International Olympic Committee in a closed-door meeting last Tuesday. The mayor said IOC was satisfied with the preparations, though he did say he was concerned about work to be done on Rio's Galeão International Airport. And time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese and Jerry Lewis reunited at the Tribeca Film Festival for the 30th anniversary of the film King of Comedy. The trio posed for pictures before sitting down for a discussion on the 1983 movie about the relationship between celebrities and the media. The screening of the film marked the end of the 12-day Tribeca Film Festival. Psy continues to reign supreme as K-pop's biggest superstar, and now the gentleman rapper gets a shot at becoming its first superhero, appearing in a comic book release Wednesday in the US and South Korea. The 26-page biographical book starts at the beginning of the South Korean's life as a child and then goes on to show his rise to fame. Vivid images show Psy teaching Ellen and Britney Spears the dance for Gangnam Style, and his visit with United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Hundreds of fans screamed and waved as the cast of Star Trek Into Darkness beamed into Berlin to promote the latest adventures on board the Starship Enterprise. Into Darkness follows the crew of the Enterprise starship as they return to an Earth left in chaos, with Kirk, Spock and the rest of the crew setting out to capture those responsible. Star Trek Into the Darkness kicks off in Germany cinemas on May 9th. Concert promoters AEG Live played a key role in the sudden 2009 death of Michael Jackson, although many people, including the actions of Jackson himself, contributed to his demise, an attorney for Jackson's family told a Los Angeles jury. AEG Live contends that it did not hire or supervise Murray and claims that Jackson had prescription drug problems for years before entering into any agreement for the London concerts.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. As I sign off, take a look at the grand ceremonies as millions of Dutch people dressed in orange flock to celebrations around the Netherlands. After a 33-year reign, Queen Beatrix abdicated in favor of her eldest son, Willem Alexander. Goodbye and thanks for tuning in.